Hey everyone, and welcome into Power Hour, part of the Until Saturday Network. I'm Nicole Auerbach. He's Chris Vanini. Before we get started here, reacting live to this week's CFP rankings, the last set of rankings before the real ones on Sunday, I want to remind you all to be sure to follow this podcast on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. We would love a 5-star review or questions. We'll answer them on the show. If you subscribe to Until Saturday on YouTube, you can watch all of our live shows and you get notifications for them because we go live for these shows. We will be live on Sunday after the selections are announced on ESPN. Also, obviously, we have the Sunday Sound Off show and picks shows. So you're going to want to see all of that on YouTube. You can leave us a voicemail at any point as well for that Sound Off show. Wanted to also let you know that we are running a gift subscription over at The Athletic. A 1-year gift subscription is only $19.99. You can give someone 2 years for $39.99 by visiting theathletic.com/gift sale. While you're there, you can also sign up for our Until Saturday newsletter, where you'll get your daily fill of college football news right into your inbox. Okay, let's dive in, Chris. This is an interesting set of rankings. This is the last one we're going to get before they give us the real thing on Sunday. This is what we have heading into conference championship weekend. Georgia stays at number 1, Michigan at number 2, Washington at 3, Florida State back into the top 4 at number 4. Number 5, Oregon. Number 6, Ohio State. Texas at 7, Alabama at 8. These are the teams that have a chance for the college football playoff, no matter how long the shot is. Let's start with Ohio State. They go from 2 last week. They lose to Michigan on the road. They fall to 6. Is that where you thought they were going to be? Are they high? Are they low? What do you make of the Buckeyes?
It's interesting, but also largely irrelevant where Ohio State is because all the other one-loss teams are playing. So either they will win and move ahead of Ohio State or lose and be behind Ohio State at the end. I put Ohio State at 5 in my rankings. I think you can make a case that they have the most impressive one-loss resume to this point. Based on where things are, putting them behind Oregon but ahead of Texas and Alabama is a little weird because you could make a case that Texas and Alabama actually have the most impressive resumes, but Texas has that loss or Alabama has that loss. So it's interesting. There is a slight opening for Ohio State, as much as some people think they are gone. If Michigan wins, if Georgia wins, if Washington wins and Florida State loses and Texas loses to Oklahoma State.
I think that's the scenario. And I've been arguing with our colleague Stuart Mandel on Slack because he was convinced that they had no shot. But that is the scenario for Ohio State. It's a lot of things that need to happen, but they're alive to again possibly backdoor into the playoff. As you mentioned,
it's unlikely. I do not think Oklahoma State has much of a chance against Texas, but anything's possible. I'll be there. So
listen, this is you're going to jinx it because you're going to go there and you're going to get a crazy game. But we're heading into a conference championship weekend that has higher stakes than I can think of. I mean, the first year you had Ohio State with a backup quarterback. Texas and Baylor didn't play. That was the one true champion thing. I can't think of another weekend with this much still undecided, with this many teams still technically alive. And we can go through the path for each of them. But I think the key to a lot of these scenarios is Florida State. They're undefeated. They're playing Tate Rodemaker. This was his first start against Florida, and FSU struggled early, and then they figured some things out. It was really tough. Rivalry game. They get the win, and they come out of that game victorious. But a lot of people are rightfully pointing out that this is not the same team without Jordan Travis.
It's not.
They're not. But they're still unbeaten. They have Louisville, who, by the way, stayed in the top 15 despite their loss. So that is a top 15 opportunity for Florida State in the ACC championship game. And they're in the top 4 right now, coming off of that game, their first full game with their backup quarterback starting and playing. Now, Reese Davis was hosting ESPN's CFP show. He asked committee chair Boo Corrigan about Florida State with Tate Rodemaker. Here's what he had to say.
How did the committee evaluate the Florida State team, particularly the way it played on offense against Florida Saturday night?
Yeah, different team, right? Different team without Jordan Travis. Tate Rodemaker continues to in the game and a half that he's been playing, has done well, has kind of managed the game. Trey Benson getting 3 touchdowns during the course of that game, as we talked about last week. It's more than just one player, but obviously they're a different team without Travis.
Okay, so he said the phrase different team a lot. Is there any question, Chris, in your mind that if they beat Louisville and they're 13-0 ACC champions, that they could be left out?
To me, no. It's interesting that this set of rankings this season has to be the easiest they've ever done.
They barely moved.
Really,
the top 8 has been the same the whole time.
Everybody that matters pretty much has been the same, and they've not really had to do much. Now, this coming weekend, they could, again, perhaps have to do nothing. If Michigan, Washington, Georgia, Florida State win, or even if Oregon wins, it's easy top 4.
Yep.
That's it. In the last edition of the CFP Top 4, we might have the one chaos situation that we have avoided for 10 years. We will see. But I don't think Florida State winning, being undefeated and not getting in, I don't think it's a possibility. As much as I think that Florida State team perhaps gets shellacked by whoever they play in the playoff, I don't think the committee is going to take away an undefeated team from a Power 5 conference that has been in the top 5 all year because the quarterback went down. I don't think they would do it.
The CFP, the 4-team CFP, was not designed to leave out an undefeated Power 5 champion. You can say what you want about non-conference schedules, but that someone made it through a Power 5 conference schedule and got to the end and became the conference champion, that is supposed to matter. It is one of the pieces of the criteria. It's a feather in your cap. I think the only way that Florida State's drop off without Jordan Travis impacts them is in seeding. And we could see that if Oregon were to beat Washington and maybe jump to the 3 spot above Florida State at 4, but it shouldn't impact selection. And I thought that was another point that was made on the Tuesday show, I think by Reese, was that it doesn't matter if the team gets blown out after making the playoff. Like that's a different factor than whether or not you deserve to be selected to make the 14 field.
Yeah, Greg McElroy listed off several teams. It was like they weren't the best team. They weren't one of the 4 best teams, and they got in. And so I think there is a history of that.
Yeah, no, I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like the reasons those teams made the playoff are different than how they perform in the playoff. We've had so many blowouts. We've had teams that were like kind of past their peak on the season, and like that doesn't justify or retroactively not justify a selection.
Correct.
Like we go through this with the basketball tournament all the time. So just want to make that point clear. I want to let's pull up this comment from Chris Callahan. So this is about Florida State. So he is saying that the committee better hope that Georgia doesn't lose because that is the only scenario where Florida State can get left out. So in this scenario, you've got a 1-loss SEC champion Alabama, a 1-loss non-champion Georgia, with a couple of two top 15 wins, I think at that point you'd have. Mm-hmm. Chris, what do you think about this? Do you think Florida State would actually be in danger?
No, I don't think an undefeated Florida State is going to get left out. As weird as it might be, a situation where you could have an SEC team left out, like I think that's more likely than an undefeated Florida State team being left out. Not to say that Florida State is better than those 2 teams. I just don't think they're going to do it. Yeah. I just don't think they're going to do it. And along those lines, I mean, the other debate, which I don't think is a debate, is Texas or Alabama if it comes down to it. If Texas wins and Alabama beats Georgia, say there's one spot for one of them, who does it go to? It's Texas. It's got to be Texas. I don't see any way the committee would put Alabama ahead of Texas if Texas is 13-1 and has a 10-point win in Tuscaloosa. I don't think they're going to do it. For all the talk that Ari and other people do about the regular season and the importance of the regular season, nothing would make the regular season more irrelevant than if Alabama got into the playoff over Texas, with both of them winning their conference championships. I just don't think that's going to happen either.
I completely agree. And listen, I've done a 180 on this in the last 48 hours because 2 days ago, I was like, you know what? If Alabama is a 1-loss SEC champ with a win over Georgia, who's the number 1 team in the country, the committee will put them in. But you're totally right, because at that point, you would have 2 1-loss Power 5 champions. They're in the same band. You have to compare them to each other, and you would have to look at that head-to-head result. Otherwise, Why would you play the game? Why would you ever play that game? Or next year, let's say in these new conferences, let's say Oregon plays Ohio State and Oregon loses to Ohio State in September. And then you get to the end of the year and go, well, it doesn't matter. It was September. Like, you guys didn't count this last year. Like, it does, that result didn't count. It didn't make any difference. And it was a double-digit result, and it was at home for Alabama. So that the committee has been consistent with these two teams from the very beginning this season.
Yep.
Alabama has always been behind Texas. So you're right. That would have to play in. It would have to matter. Even if you wanted to give teams credit for getting better as the season went on, Alabama certainly has. But what's the point of playing these games, right? If you don't end up counting it in the one scenario where that matters. Because in all of these other scenarios that we can throw out there, Alabama's in. But that is the one, because you have a head-to-head result against one team that you would be directly compared to against. Now, we have a couple comments from folks wondering why Oregon is the top-ranked one-loss team. And they've been the top one-loss team also from the beginning. Committee has liked them, even when some of their losses have depreciated in value. So Reese Davis also asked Boo Corrigan about this. He asked specifically about Oregon and Texas. So let's hear the committee chair.
Texas has a strength of schedule that's about 40-plus spots better than Oregon's. They have more wins against ranked teams by your rankings than do the Ducks. Why is Oregon ahead of Texas?
Yeah, Oregon has continued to dominate. Obviously, the loss to Washington early in the year, 36-33. But coming out of last week, in the way they played an Oregon State team that we really respect as a group, held them to 7 points as opposed to 34. Which they have averaged on the year. And, the season Bo Nix is having 78% completion percentage. They just continue to impress the committee with both the offense and the defense.
What consideration was given to the common opponent that those two have? Texas beat Texas Tech by 50, and Oregon beat them by one possession.
Yeah, we look at everything, as we've talked about each week. That we've been here. We're not relying on one single data point, one single game. We're looking at, we're through 13 weeks right now and making sure that as we do go through it, we are comparing everything that's going on over the course of the year.
Okay. Catherine B is making this point in the comment section that Washington looks phenomenal. They certainly passed the eye test. They have been blowing a lot of teams out. They really do have this incredibly high-powered and it can be very balanced offense. They have good defense. Basically, Boo Corrigan is all in on the Bo Nix Heisman campaign, it sounded like, throwing away out all of his stats and how well he's been playing. I think that this committee just really likes Oregon because their resume has not stacked up. And it is not close to Texas's or Alabama in terms of the quality wins. But they have been above them this whole time. And what that means to me, Chris, is that the winner of Oregon and Washington is going to make the playoff. Like, at that point, if this is the team that has been ranked above the other one-loss teams, despite the resume not being as strong, playing a team that's in, they would be avenging their only loss. So they would have beaten everybody on their schedule and would be a conference champion. That's a slam dunk. And so that order does matter there, right? Because that's why Texas needs help. That's why Texas needs other things to happen, like a Florida State loss and some of these other dynamics to play in so that they can get a spot, because I think the Pac-12 has locked up one of the top 4 spots.
I think so too. And Oregon's been the top one-loss team from the beginning. They have stayed there the whole time. In which case, I don't think there's nothing Texas can do now to leap an Oregon that wins. If Oregon beats Washington and Texas beats Oklahoma State, there's nothing Texas can do to get ahead of Oregon. Now, you can say they should be. You could make the case that right now Texas should be ahead, but if Oregon beats Washington, Oregon should be ahead. It ultimately doesn't matter. But at this point, yeah, Oregon's going to go if they win. And same goes for Alabama. If you beat number 1, or if you beat number 1 and Oregon beats number 3, I don't think there's enough there for Alabama to leap Oregon either. So it does feel like Oregon's win or in. Look, Oregon, it's a different conversation if they beat Washington than it is now. Their best win is Oregon State. It's this past weekend. USC has fallen off. Utah has fallen off. Arizona's best one might be Arizona. Oregon State, is in there as well. So they don't have many great wins like Texas does, or even Ohio State does. So you need some help. Again, this could be crazy on Saturday, or it could be very easy. But I think
Yep.
it's pretty clear. The committee has made it clear if Oregon wins, they're in.
All right, let's put a couple of these comments up. I think they're really good. Here's from Pork Rinds. Love the name, by the way. If we all know Alabama can beat Washington, Oregon, and Florida State, why are they ranked ahead of Alabama? I don't know about Oregon, by the way, as we throw these teams
No.
in here. But I mean, I think that this is, it's something that you're going to face in a lot of years. Like, we just haven't had a lot of like really competitive races for these spots, but you are comparing teams with only 12 or 13 data points that have played different schedules. Like, you do have to have other factors that determine it, which is why, again, you've seen different conference champions in different conferences. And by the way, I would like just to point out, and I know, you can throw out rivalry games and all that, but Alabama is fortunate that they are not a 2-loss team. And that would have entirely changed the dynamics, 4th and 31. So for acting like they have just been extreme, they've just gotten better as the whole season has happened, and they're just on this upward trajectory. No, they have played games just like Washington has had to escape. That was as much of an escape as anybody else.
Yep, that's an important point, because I saw it was on First Take or something today. Shannon Sharp was like, yeah, I know Alabama had to escape Auburn, but that's a rivalry game or whatever. What are you talking about? Auburn just lost by 3 touchdowns to New Mexico State, and they needed to convert a 4th and 31. Do not tell me that Alabama clearly is set up.
Well, and then also, then you can't, if you're going to use that argument, then you can't, like Washington, some of their escapes, right?
Yeah. Ones, or the Texas ones with TCU and Kansas State and whatever. So yeah, all of the 1-loss teams have questionable escapes on their resume. Nobody's perfect, other than even the undefeated teams.
Here's one other question from Zach F. Why would Alabama ever play a competitive non-conference game at the beginning of the year again? There's no chance for getting better. The argument goes both ways. I want to point out that this is going to change a little bit, or significantly actually, in a 12-team playoff era, because ideally teams will get more credit for strength of schedule and will get more credit for playing challenging games. You're also going to have really loaded SEC schedules and really loaded Big Ten schedules. Like, those teams are good. Those schedules are just going to look different, and they're going to be able to weather losses in a way that we don't see them do now. But like, the reason you play that game is to put yourself in a position to win it and to get credit for playing it. But it was a home game and you lost by double digits. Like, that part can't get excused away. So there is risk, which is why a lot of teams don't play these games, haven't scheduled games like this in the 14 playoff era. But it does need to matter, because you can't just escape or throw away the result entirely and give Alabama all of the credit for playing the game, but losing. Like, you need to, the result of the game in a situation where you have a true head-to-head, like, does need to impact the decision. And we've seen it not impact the decision in different years when the committee has said, like, these teams aren't compared to each other. Like, if they're different groupings that are compared to other teams, they'll say, like, okay, well, we're not adhering to that. But they clearly think that Texas and Alabama are in the same grouping, that they're in the same band of teams. And so you'd have to think, unless the committee went against kind of their own logic, the way they've approached this season, and said, hey, Alabama's win over Georgia puts them in a different echelon than Texas's win over Oklahoma State. But they haven't done that based on the losses, based on their schedules so far. They've kept them in the same grouping. So that's why I default to saying that I think they would still use head-to-head if those two teams.
And I'll say the seeding of these teams is going to be really interesting, especially if Alabama beats Georgia, because if one of the SEC teams comes in, they'll probably be seeded like 3 or 4, and you're not going to want to face them if you're 1 or 2. Like, Ari made the comment last year when the seeding came out that Georgia got the short end of the stick by getting Ohio State instead of getting TCU. Now, we know how the games turned out, but clearly Ohio State was a much tougher test for Georgia than TCU would have been, than TCU was. So the seeding of this is going to be really interesting, because if Washington wins, do they move up to 2 and Michigan to 3? It may not really matter, but could impact location and stuff like that. If Florida State loses, who comes in? Would you rather play Oregon, or would you rather play Washington, or would you rather
how about
play
this though?
Michigan?
Florida State wins. and you're Georgia, do you still want to play in the Sugar Bowl? Or is
Does
that too close to Florida State?
If Florida State wins and Oregon wins, does Florida State go up to 3 or do they
Right.
stay at 4? I think they would
Right, and
probably
that
stay
could
at 4, get jumped by a one-loss team.
Yeah, and I think all of that, again, impacts the semifinals and the way that those play out. Chris, want to get your thoughts on the group of 5 race because I know you had some observations based on this top 25.
Yeah, I think Liberty's got a shot here. They're a couple spots behind Tulane. If Tulane wins against SMU, they're in, which makes sense. SMU will be without quarterback Preston Stone, by the way, really good quarterback who was season-ending injury against Navy. Tulane's, I think, a 5.5-point favorite. So if Tulane wins, they get the spot. It's most likely the Peach Bowl, and I think Penn State they probably play. If they lose to SMU and Liberty beats New Mexico State, who now has 10 wins, that would be 2 wins against New Mexico State. I think there's a chance SMU does not jump Liberty. We've kind of thought for a while SMU may jump Liberty if they win, but SMU's not in the top 25. I mean, Liberty's 24, and we don't know how far back SMU is at 26 or beyond. So I don't think it's a guarantee that the American Conference winner is in. I think Liberty's got a shot. Yes, Liberty has played a very, very weak schedule. Yes, SMU had played a weak schedule until these last couple of games, beating Memphis, and then if they beat Tulane. So it'll be really interesting what that group of 5 spot comes down to. If it's SMU, I think there's a chance they go to the Cotton Bowl, by the way. I know they normally don't do 2 straight G5 hosts for one of those bowl games, but you'd probably rather have SMU in the Cotton Bowl than out the Peach Bowl. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes as well. So the American Championship game is the one to watch for the group of 5. If Tulane wins, they're in. If not, Liberty, if they win and they're 13-0, have a shot. Would they put a 2-loss SMU ahead of a undefeated Liberty? That's kind of been the assumption, but after seeing these rankings, I'm not so sure.
Lots to play for this weekend. We've been super excited for some of these matchups. Really been hoping since they played the first time that we get Oregon, Washington. We've looked forward to Georgia, Alabama. Like, it's going to be a super fun weekend. Massive stakes. Hopefully there's a little chaos. I would like to see the committee have to earn their keep. I would like to see them have to make a decision this year, but we will see if that happens, if it comes down to that. As a reminder, I mentioned this at the top of the show, but we will be live on Sunday after the committee puts out the top 4. Until Saturday, YouTube page, be there. It'll be Ari, it'll be Ubben. They might have guests, who knows. But we will be covering that live. You'll also be wanting to read The Athletic. We'll have a live blog. We'll have instant analysis. You'll want to catch all of that. But this has been a blast to do this on Tuesday nights with you, Chris. It's been fun to do a live Power Hour segment each week. So we wanted to thank everyone who has spent time in the comment section, who's watched this with us, who've engaged. It's been really fun. And for anyone who is watching right now, you can catch the second half of the Power Hour episode. It'll be on your feeds, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, by morning. So be sure to check out the rest of the episode. We dive into coaching changes and a number of other things that have happened in college football this week. But thanks again, and enjoy the games this weekend, and we'll see you on Sunday.